Good morning. It is great to be here with y'all. Let me get my props set up there. What a great way to kick off the convention, and what a great way at the same time to celebrate our Scottish heritage. How about one more hand for the Gordon Pipers? On behalf of the American Angus Association and your board of directors, let me be the first to officially welcome you to Indianapolis. We're delighted that you came here to be with us. We know that you took time away from your cattle operations, your businesses, and your families to be here, and for that we're grateful. Excuse me. Over the next 3 days, we want you guys to have a great time. We excuse me. We want you to learn a lot while you're here. We want you to network. We want you to have fun. But most of all, when you leave here, we want you to be invigorated about being in the Angus business, because you should be. Over the next 3 days, you're going to see a lot of presentations. You're going to see a lot of charts and graphs on slides. And frankly, on Monday morning, when I give the association update, you'll see that from me as well. But not today. Today, I'm going to use a few photographs because I want to tell a story. And I want to tell a story about where we've been, but more importantly, where we're going. A few years back, I was talking to a friend of mine about a business situation, and it was a complicated matter, and I was trying to figure out where I should start explaining the details. And I was struggling with it, and she finally looked at me, she smiled, she said, why don't you start at the beginning? So that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to start at the beginning. And the beginning of this story begins with none other than George Grant. Oops. We've all seen this photograph, this iconic photograph, numerous times, some of us hundreds of times, but the reason I brought it and wanted to show it to you was I wanted to remind everybody he was a real person. He was a real person with a real dream. He, just like all of us, he had good days, he had bad days, and he faced adversity just like all of us do. But no matter how tough times might get for him, he never doubted the superiority of Angus cattle. So our story and our heritage begins right here with him, because his heritage is our heritage, and it's the heritage of everyone in the Angus business. Take a moment to think about the impact this breed has had since George Grant arrived in Kansas in 1873 with his 3 Angus bulls. One decision made by one man ultimately changed the course of the cattle business. Because of that decision today, Angus touches every corner, every farm and ranch in this country, and people in restaurants around the world dine on the beef we produce. We were having a discussion in St. Joseph a couple of weeks ago. We were planning the presentation this morning, and we started talking about if you just went out on a downtown street and you asked people, what's the best beef? How would they answer? So I had the brilliant idea of saying, well, why don't we just do that in Indianapolis? So yesterday afternoon, Jenna McGrail and Josh Commonellis from angus.media actually did that. They took their cameras, they went out here on the streets of Indianapolis, and they asked people, what's the best beef? Let's watch and see what we learned.
What's your favorite type of beef?
Like, what do you mean?
In terms of like what cut, like what part of the cow?
Like steak?
Steak.
I like steak.
What's your favorite type of beef?
Angus.
I always like the Angus beef.
Oh, Angus beef.
We'll get Angus when we can.
It's a well-renowned beef, even in Canada.
When you think of the word Angus, what comes to mind?
Good quality.
To me, that means quality.
Top quality beef.
It tastes good.
It is representative of quality.
Yeah, I've had Angus beef. It tastes good.
I think higher quality.
Do you recognize the certified Angus beef brand of beef?
Yes, and we've purchased that before.
What do you think about when you hear of the certified Angus beef brand?
I mean, the black Angus to me is the only way to go. Yeah.
Would you recognize an Angus cow if you saw one here today?
I would absolutely have zero idea what an Angus cow is.
Like a real cow, a live cow, I wouldn't. Not unless they're labeled.
No.
No.
No idea.
Are they black? I'm guessing they're black. They're black.
They're all black.
Oh, yeah, it's good education. Like, I would like to see one.
So what would you tell our farmers and ranchers who are here who raise these cattle?
I would just say keep up the good work.
The good work, yes.
Well, I appreciate all that your folks do. Keep it coming.
Keep up the good work.
Just keep raising the Angus, bringing the product to market.
I'm really glad that idea worked out, because if it didn't, I was going to have to tell another story, and I was kind of... No, seriously, what a great compliment of the beef we produce. During the last 11 months, it was 11 months on the 1st of November since I accepted this position, I've had the privilege of getting to know many in this room. I've been on more than 100 flights. There's no such thing as a nonstop flight anymore, I've determined. I've put on over 10,000 miles in rental cars. None of you guys live near an airport. And I've been in 20 plus states. You'd almost think I'm running for office, right? My first week on the job, though, I headed to Montana. I got to see Jim and Tammy Sitz and Leo and Sam McDonald. And over the course of the next 11 months, I went as far south as Luling, Texas, to see my friend and fellow alum from Southwest Texas State, Mr. Bodie Langford. I've been to Northern California to see David and Janine Del Porto. And just a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of spending an evening with the Trowbridge family in New York. And I've been every place in between. But the one thing I've learned about you guys from all the miles I've traveled and all the flights I've been on is you all have a similar story. And quite frankly, it's similar to my story as well. I have a deep appreciation for the way things were. Our home in Missouri is filled with items from our ranch in South Texas, whether it be my great-grandfather Charlie's saddle, my grandfather Gus's shafts, old spurs, lariats, family photos. It's actually a photograph of my grandfather from the 70s. You might see the resemblance a bit. And yes, Don Schiefelbein, I realize I'm very fortunate that Benita lets me fill my house with old saddles and shafts. But I want to tell you a story about those shafts for a second. My grandfather bought those in around 1940. He wore them until my dad got old enough, or large enough, rather, to need a pair like that, and he handed them to my dad, and my dad outgrew them. He kept them around until I could use them one day. And it's not so much the age of the shafts I want to tell you a story about, but you notice the black stains on there. And I didn't think anything about it, but when I showed this photograph in the office the other day, somebody made mention and said, boy, look at all that tattoo ink. That's not tattoo ink, okay? And if anybody from the South and is old enough to remember will understand what I'm about to say. Those black stains come from a tar-based salve that was actually called Product 66. And he used Product 66 to put on the navel of a newborn calf to keep it from getting a screwworm infection. Because we fought screwworms until almost the mid-70s in South Texas. Right? So the obvious question, and I can see Sherry Spader right now, I can see the wheels turning, saying, okay, so if the purpose was to put the salve on the newborn calf's navel, why is it all over the shafts, right? Well, in theory, it worked that way. If the mama cow wasn't too protective, and if your horse worked properly and you made a good throw, caught your calf, you put it on the navel and everything was fine. But you guys are in the cattle business. It doesn't work that way, does it? You got an angry mama, scared baby calf. You got a flighty horse because he knows what's about to happen, right? Probably have a dog in there and you got a rope. And then you've got this black salve, and it wasn't on a tube. For all you millennials, they didn't have tubes back then. You had it on a little cotton ball with a stick that you'd have to put it on there, right? We factor all those variables together. And even though we all know they're all God's creatures, and our job is to steward them, sometimes I don't think God tells the animals, right? Sometimes the most normal day turns into a rodeo, right? That's why you have all the black stains on the chaps. But in all seriousness, my family history, just like yours, is what keeps me grounded and reminds me of what's important in life. And while I'm a student of the past, I'm also a planner like most of you are, because we all know you can't achieve the future you want if you don't have a plan in place. So while the past is our foundation, a plan serves as the compass for the future. And while the two work hand in hand, you can never let your past control your future. Right? This is well, I'll get this right. There we go. This is a photo of steers taken at the Chicago stockyards during the first International Livestock Exposition in 1900. The gentleman in the far right was named L.H. Carrick. He owned and bred those steers. Mr. Carrick was a farmer, he was a cattle breeder, and he was an early leader of this association. And he strived to produce registered bulls that would sire the finest feeder calves possible, because he'd take those feeder calves and feed them out himself, and he'd mark them at the Chicago stockyards. And it's really remarkable if you look at these steers today, and granted, I know they're 3 or 4 years old. But they're pretty good quality cattle, aren't they? And Peter Rosenberg, I'm guessing you could cut some pretty good ribeyes off those carcasses, couldn't you? Right? Mr. Carrick was also the 15th president of this association, and he wrote these words in his 1902 sales catalog. The final and proper purpose of all beef cattle breeding is to produce good beef. Its highest purpose is the production of the most beef of the best quality in the least time with a given amount of feed and care. Even back then, Mr. Carrick knew that the purpose of breeding beef cattle is to produce good beef. In fact, his standards have helped guide this association for over a century now. So this evening, whether it be at Red, the steakhouse in Miami, or when somebody orders a hamburger at Meathead's in Bloomington, folks are going to dig a little deeper in their pocket and pay a little bit more with their hard-earned cash to enjoy some superior tasting Angus beef, maybe even from beef that some of us in this room raised, right? Those dollars will make their way through the system, changing multiple hands, and then their cumulative weight will eventually set the price for your customers' calves and ultimately your bulls. It's a complex system, and one that punishes bad decisions and inferior products, but yet increasingly rewards quality. And that's good for us, isn't it? Because quality and Angus go hand in hand, don't they? When I first arrived at the association last December, like anybody new to a job, I tried to ask as many questions as I could, and I visit with as many people as possible because I really want to understand not only the history of the association, but how do we get to the point we got to today? How were decisions made? And one conversation in particular, I remember I was talking with Eric Grant, president of Angus.media, and I was asking about those decisions, and he made a comment that really stayed with me. He said, you know, Alan, he goes, this association has always had a knack for making the right decision at the right time. Those words intrigued me. Right decision at the right time. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was spot on. Right decision at the right time. Let me explain what I mean. In 1949, the board of directors recognized that the association had outgrown the livestock record building in Chicago, so they started looking for new office space, formed a building committee, and over the next several years, went around the country trying to find a new home for the association. After about a 5-year search, St. Joseph, Missouri was chosen, and a new home was built because we needed a new building that modernized the building infrastructure. We needed more space. Basically, we needed to have those capabilities to better serve membership. St. Joseph was chosen for 3 reasons. Number one, the St. Joseph Chamber of Commerce was the most aggressive in wanting the association to move there. They provided us 5 free acres of land. It was centrally located between 4 land-grant universities, and then even back then, the airport, the new airport in Kansas City was on the drawing boards, right? And it was going to be way north of Kansas City, which was going to be good to be in St. Joseph. So the association decided to move to St. Joseph. This next photograph is actually the grand opening of that event in June of 1956, over 60 years ago. Our friend Tom Burke was there that day. I asked Tom last night, how old were you, Tom? He said, I was 16. The first time I heard that story, he was actually 10, then it was 13, now it's 16. So Tom was there. And I'm guessing it was a rather momentous occasion, wasn't it, Tom? But think about that fact for a moment. 6 decades. 6 decades in the same building. How many businesses today successfully stay in the same building for 60 years? Much less, how many even survive for that long? There aren't many, are there? Yet all these years later, we continue to reap the benefits of that grand old building. It's an efficient place to work. It's centrally located for travel. And it's well served the membership as an incubator of ideas and important decisions. And while that was true in the past, that remains true today as well. In the 1960s, the association began to create the tools membership needed to produce better cattle. We launched the Angus Herd Improvement Records Program. This is a little behind there. This is the Angus Herd Improvement Records Program. This is our first computer system. My predecessor, Mr. Frank Richards, is there with some of the customer service team. We began OpenAI, which made great genetics accessible to everyone, regardless of the size of their operation. And we began carcass data collection. In 1978, we created Certified Angus Beef, which today is the largest and most recognized beef program in the world. In 1979, we bought the Angus Journal. The Angus Journal set the foundation for what you know today as Angus.media, which is one of the largest livestock media companies in the world. In 2000, we launched the Angus Foundation. This is actually a photograph of the first foundation heifer, which was purchased by the Baldrige family in 1981. And in 2007, the association created Angus Genetics Incorporated. Today, AGI manages the largest and most comprehensive beef genomic database in the world. See a pattern here? Right decision at the right time. It's almost as if it's hardwired into this association's DNA, isn't it? And it's really important to note that each decision built upon the other, creating synergies that ultimately set the foundation for the great success we enjoy today. So we hear all the time, beef industry doesn't have a future, right? Beef's unhealthy. Beef's bad for the environment. Beef can't compete with pork or poultry. But the truth of the matter is far different. In fact, everything about this association runs counter to those criticisms. The Angus business is growing. Registrations are up again. Our share of the commercial cattle market and genetics continues to grow, and certified Angus beef just achieved what was once considered unimaginable success this past year. The bottom line is that more people around the world want what you produce every day. So this morning, we're going to take a moment to celebrate who we are, what we do, and what we've accomplished. But we also want to pause to think about what brought us all here in the first place, and those decisions that were made that have had so much impact on our families, our businesses, and our rural communities. I did that for dramatic effect. I really didn't need any water. I want to share one final story with you. I brought with me a copy of the 1972 July edition of the American Hereford Journal. It was actually the 49th Herd Bull edition. Cover to cover, it's 926 pages, full of stories, advertisements from Hereford breeders around the country. Actually, it's mostly advertisements. That's all right. That's what we like to look at, right? And I know you're wondering, why in the world is a copy of the American Hereford Journal, particularly an old one, on the stage at the National Angus Convention? And I'm guessing we don't need Keith Evans to go research to find out this is probably the first time this has ever happened, right? But I brought it here because I wanted you to see it. See, I keep it in my office on the cadenza behind my desk because I want to be reminded each day how things can change. 45 years ago, they were just like us. Almost identical in the number of cattle registered. They actually had a larger commercial market share than Angus did. The two associations were almost identical except for one key difference. One association had the courage to make strategic decisions for the future, to not only plan for change, but to embrace change. And while one planned for change, the other chose to stand pat. They chose not to look ahead, not to create a plan for the future, because it'd be better just to wait until tomorrow to see what would come. Today, we're the envy of every beef breed association in the world. We have more members than all the other U.S. beef breeds combined. We register as many cattle as the others combined as well. AGI manages the largest and most accurate beef database, while angus.media offers us a significant advantage in the way we get our message out to our customers. Certified Angus Beef is a worldwide leader in branded beef programs, while the Angus Foundation represents our finest ideals when it comes to supporting youth, education, and research. And finally, our membership services are unmatched. But why? What's the secret to our success? I think there are two reasons. First, we remain true to our mission to maintain the purity of our breed of cattle and our bloodlines. And by remaining true to our mission, we've produced the most consistent performance cattle and ultimately tasting beef in the world. And there are other associations today that, in an attempt to remain relevant, register cattle of mixed breeds within their own registry. But we never went down that path. And we never will. Because you don't make a brand stronger, or in this case, this breed, you don't make it stronger by weakening its core. That's one reason. Second, as an association, we've been blessed with strong leadership over the years and the decades. Leadership that had the resolve to plan for the future to ensure that the association was positioned for long-term growth. I will share with you without any hesitation whatsoever, in the 11 months I've been here, your board of directors, led by Chairman Jim Sitt's leadership, have displayed that same commitment to innovative decision-making that has been so evident in our history. We spent a number of months working on the long-range strategic plan. It represents the most comprehensive and far-reaching effort ever been done for this association when it comes to a long-range plan. It involved extensive research, serious deliberation, and thoughtful discussion by the board. The decisions that resulted from their tireless efforts focused on doing what's best for the association, not what is best for themselves or their operations. But that's what you'd expect, isn't it? That's what this association does. So let me bring this story to a final point. On Monday morning, we'll be unveiling the details of our long-range strategic plan. As you consider the merits of our plan, I want you to think ahead 10, 20, even 30 years. And I want you to think about the possibilities and the opportunities that we're going to create for our families, our businesses, and our communities. Because now it's our turn. It's our turn to make the right decision at the right time. And I believe, and I know, that time is now. Before we look ahead, though, I want to look back one more time, because we want to take a moment to celebrate a major accomplishment that occurred this past year. As Keith Evans wrote in his wonderful book, A Historic Angus Journey, quoting, "Great things often spring from humble beginnings." And that's no more evident than with certified Angus beef. The CAB brand is coming up on its 40th anniversary in a couple of years, but we just reached an incredible milestone that was a result of the right decision being made at the right time. With that, I would like to welcome and to come to the stage and share our good news, my friend and colleague, Dr. John Stika, the president of Certified Angus Beef.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, good morning, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you really a framing of what really was a historic year that all of you should take a tremendous amount of pride in. You know, Alan did a phenomenal job earlier of really touching on of touching on the humble beginnings of certified Angus beef, as so many other things that started within the association at the same time. And many of you in this room might be able to recall, in actual fact, the time that first carcass was certified in the certified Angus beef brand back in 1978, that ultimately resulted in that first pound of certified Angus beef being sold to Miss Ella Witt at Renzetti's IGA in Columbus, Ohio at 8:35 p.m. on October 18th, 1978. And I think it's important to look back at those humble beginnings, because those early victories of certifying that first carcass and selling that first pound under the brand name, combined with the passion, the dedication, the commitment of so many of you in this room and others, countless others, who really drove this brand forward and solidified that effort into something meaningful. I think it's important to note that those early victories and that commitment and passion continue to this day to be the foundation for what has really evolved to be almost 4 decades of focus on growing this brand's scope and this brand's impact within the entire beef community. Almost 4 decades. I think, as many of you know, for 38 years now, certified Angus beef has grown its annual sales every year with the exception of 4 years in its history. Most recently, that being caused by BSE back in 2004. But since that time, most recently, since BSE, certified Angus beef has experienced growth 11 years. The last 9 years being records that were set in annual sales volume during that time, coming into 2016. And most excitingly, solidifying its relevance to consumers, as that growth that we most recently experienced occurred during the toughest economy and the tightest supplies in the beef cattle industry that my generation has ever seen. And so what does that mean? Well, I'm happy to tell you that 2016 and the results that this brand experienced continue that legacy of growth that we've seen over 38 years in existence. Now, not only will 2016 go down as the 10th year that an annual sales record was set in a row, but perhaps more historically to this group, in the sense of pride and accomplishment, 2016 will mark the year that the efforts of you as ranchers and cattlemen, cattle feeders and packers, and our licensed end users, 18,000 of them strong in 50 different countries, come together, those efforts come together to drive global certified Angus beef sales in excess of 1 billion pounds for the first time in this brand's history. And if that doesn't make you excited, I don't know what does, okay? It's definitely something to celebrate and something to take pause and to really evaluate how did this happen, what steps happened over the course of time to really allow this type of success to be achieved this year. Now, I think it's important that as we look at the sales of certified Angus beef this past year, not only did we exceed 1 billion pounds, we actually surpassed 1 billion pounds by more than 15 million pounds this past year. That represents a 13.3% increase in sales when the brand was averaging 3% growth over the prior 5 years. That growth alone equates to 119 million pounds in additional sales this year compared to last year. To give you some perspective, that 119 million pounds in growth alone this past year is more than the brand sold during its first 10 years in existence combined. To give you more perspective, it took 2 years for licensed partners to sell 1 million pounds when the brand was first started. Today, on your behalf as registered Angus breeders, our licensed network of 18,000 partners sell 1 million pounds every 2 hours and 3 minutes during the business day. That will give you perspective. And it's been a phenomenal year. Okay, and if you wonder what it takes to sell 1 billion pounds in a year, this is what monthly sales look like. You have to average 83.3 million pounds a month to hit 1 billion pounds in sales. And last year started off extremely strong, with strong sales in October, and we even finished even stronger as we look through the summer months of grilling season into September. We set individual monthly sales records in each of the 12 months this past year. In addition to that, most notably, 8 of the 10 best sales months in the history of the brand occurred in 2016's fiscal year. Most notably, July, August, and September all averaged over 90 million pounds, and that's the first time that any month in the history of the brand has ever surpassed that 90 million pound threshold. I'll share with you now, as I have this graph up in front of you, 2017 is starting off even stronger. We're 7% up in October compared to the number that you see on the screen for 2016. And if everybody does their part in November and forbids eating turkey at the Thanksgiving table, maybe November can be a record month again moving forward. But again, it's been a phenomenal growth rate and a phenomenal year, as you can see in the numbers that I share there in front of you. Our licensed partners do a phenomenal job on your behalf. They're as committed to selling the product as you are to raising it. And we saw sales records set in every division of our business and virtually every product category that we offer as well. As I shared, the brand grew 13.3%. Our retail partners here domestically represented the largest growth that we experienced overall through our program this past year. They're the largest division that we have, and they represented 60% of the 119 million pounds of growth we experienced this past year. Just absolutely a phenomenal commitment to what our retail partners were able to achieve. Our food service partners in hotels and restaurants and so forth, they celebrated their 6th consecutive year of record sales this past year and grew their business again by 6% plus compared to the year prior. And internationally, the international market only continues to grow in importance to the success of this brand. And this past year, our partners outside of U.S. borders grew their certified Angus beef sales in excess of 15%. How important is Japan to this brand? Well, I'll tell you that Japan alone grew their certified Angus beef sales 110% this past year, and that represents an individual country growth, total growth volume in excess of 10 million pounds of growth compared to the year prior in Japan alone. Now, while our licensed partners and our customers did a phenomenal job this past year, and we're continuing to support them, and they're excited and passionate about the year to come, I want to share with you that the catalyst for the kind of success that we jointly achieved this past year truly did originate within ranching country. And it was rooted in the fact that this past year we saw more high-quality Angus cattle come to market than we have ever at any point in our history. As herd expansion took place in the areas where you live, it's been absolutely phenomenal to see you and your customers assemble what, in all honesty, is the highest quality, most Angus-influenced cow herd North America has ever seen. It perhaps represents one of the most purpose-driven expansions ever to take place in the beef community. Because it was an expansion that happened with the consumer and their needs, at least in consideration to when you made decisions about genetics, about management and so forth. And it's been absolutely phenomenal. And the impact that we saw this year was an increase of about 6 to 7% in the number of Angus-influenced cattle that entered the packing plants that we have licensed to produce this product. But more important than the sheer growth in the number of cattle that we saw come to the packing plant was the quality level that those cattle were able to achieve. This past year, as you can see on the screen, a record 28.9% of all Angus-influenced steers and heifers offered up for the brand went on to meet the 10 science-based carcass specifications that we have that govern the eating quality of this program. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Look at where we were a decade ago at an acceptance rate of 14% compared to where we are today. And what I tell you is the most exciting thing about this 28.9% is it's not random, it's intentional. It represents a conscious effort on the part of you as registered Angus breeders, your customers, cattle feeders and packers, to breed, feed, and process cattle with consumer demand for certified Angus beef in mind when you make those genetic and management decisions. And that's what's the most exciting. Now, translate that 28.9% to supply, and what we find is that this past year, that record acceptance rate increased the number of certified Angus beef carcasses in excess of 12.5%. To give you some idea what that means, is that means over the course of a year, we had more than 430,000 additional carcasses to sell in the brand this year compared to last. To give you more perspective, from an end user's perspective, that meant I had the equivalent of 1.5 months more supply this year than I had the year before. And what did they do with it? They sold it. They sold it, and the brand experienced the growth in the sales in excess of 1 billion pounds that we talked about. Now, the success of selling 1 billion pounds is outstanding, and it generates a tremendous amount of excitement, but it also becomes even more exciting when you begin to think about what its purpose is. The success of selling 1 billion pounds at the end of the day needs to come back to drive demand for the cattle that you raise. And that's really what this brand was established for back in 1978, to drive demand for the cattle that you raise and put out into the marketplace. And we all know that that starts with demand. And that demand starts with consumers and end users, and ultimately makes its way through the merchandising system to your customers and to your operations. And I think we should all take a lot of excitement and optimism in the fact that when we look at demand for certified Angus beef in the marketplace, we continue to see it grow very, very nicely and aggressively compared to other premium programs, in particular compared to demand for commodity beef, which in turn means that there's more demand for your cattle than those who are raising commodity cattle. And we see that translated in a number of different ways in the prices that you receive for your seed stock during your sales, the prices that your customers receive for their feeder cattle at the auction markets. And we continue to see it in the form of certified Angus beef premiums that are transferred from consumer spending on the brand through the retailer, the distributor, to the packer, where we see the packer continuing to pay in excess of $1 million a week in the form of certified Angus beef premiums for cattle sold on the grid that ultimately hit those 10 carcass specifications for quality. It's about demand, and this brand remains focused on your behalf in creating that demand and driving those consumer dollars back into your operations in ranching country as well. As we talk about 1 billion pounds, it is exciting. And I share with you that this brand remains focused on driving this business forward, but more importantly, please know that the 132 employees of Certified Angus Beef work for you. And we do so under the mission statement of continuing to drive demand for your registered Angus cattle by continuing to provide consumers around the world with the great tasting, high quality, ever consistent product that they have come to know as Certified Angus Beef. With that, I just want to say thanks a billion. Wear your pin with pride that's on the table in front of you. And also, I want to congratulate each and every one of you for the success that you have helped create by continuing to focus on producing high-quality Angus cattle to service the demand for high-quality beef worldwide through Certified Angus Beef. Thank you very much, and again, congratulations on your success.